All right, Bears fans, welcome to the Bear Report Podcast Network. My name is Andrew Freeman. I'm joined by Usayd Koshul today to break down boy, I don't even know how you describe this game, Usayd, but we're recapping the Bears' Week 1 loss to the Green Bay Packers, 38-20, and man, I'm at a loss of words here to kind of describe the just what happened out there. I mean, just embarrassing, just abysmal to watch, disheartening. Like any negative, adjective to describe, the way this team looked out there today. Like it was a rough game to watch, you said. And I guess before we get into the weeds of things here, how you doing today, man? What are your general takeaways from this one? Because this was a rough game to watch, and I guess I'll get your initial takeaways first, and then I can kind of do the breakdown of this thing, I guess. But yeah, just you say it. How are we doing?
I'm doing well. It is a kind of an outcome that I want to say I expected, but I also didn't expect it. If any of our listeners have listened to you and I on the Picks for Polls podcast, and you check out the staff picks that come out on the Bear Report website each week, I mean, every one of us had the Bears winning in some capacity, right? I had the Bears going plus 10, winning 24-14. And at one point in the game, the score was absolutely the other way around. But it is just very clear that this game, there's such a stark contrast between these two teams in terms of where they're at, no matter who the starting quarterback really is.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those games where you really have to question everything, organizationally. It's only week 1, I guess, so you don't want to overreact too much. But the vibes in this one are just so bad that it really just, man, it puts a lot of things into question for this team in the short term, but also the long-term outlook of this franchise as well. So, I mean, let's just dig into this thing here. First, let's just go over the general synopsis or summary of this game. The first half was a close one. Went into halftime down 10-6. The Bears, they got the ball first in this one, and unfortunately they stalled out early on where they tried to go for a 4th down. They had a QB, they had a sneak with Cole Kmet, which is kind of a trick play that didn't work. They had a QB sneak that didn't work on the first drive of the game. So right there, it's not looking great that you can't even get a yard with this offensive line that's been kind of revamped and reworked all offseason. And right away they failed the first test of the season. There, the Packers go down. They get a touchdown. Jordan Love throws a touchdown pass in the back of the end zone to kind of kick things off. The Bears do respond with a couple of field goals on the next couple of possessions. DJ Moore got his first couple of receptions as a Bear in the second quarter. It looked like the offense was starting to get into a little bit of a rhythm during those, 2 following drives. But after that, like, things just really fell apart for this team. The second half, coming out of halftime, the bubble burst, really. I mean, you had the Packers on that first drive. They go all the way down the field. They had that screen pass to Aaron Jones, which went for like a 50-yard gain that got him into range to score a touchdown. On the very next possession, the Bears just have an awful possession where they run it twice and then get nothing out of it, and then they're force the punt and get a 3 and out there. The Packers then go down on the very next possession there and get a big play for a touchdown, a slant to Aaron Jones that went for a big play. And then after that, like, things just really fell apart. Justin Fields, threw a touchdown. I should say, like, Justin Fields had a fumble in the very next possession. Didn't really result in anything for the Packers. Fields ends up getting a touchdown on Darnell Mooney later on, but yeah, after that, like, it was over after this because Jordan Love gets a touchdown in the very next possession. Then Justin Fields throw a pick 6, and then after that, everything's garbage time, right? So I don't know. It was just tough to watch. And after that pick 6, I was like, all right. I was at a buddy's house watching the game, and when that happened, I was like, all right, I'm getting out of here early. I'm going home. See you later. Let's get on this podcast and break this thing down. And yeah, my initial thoughts, you say, is that I just felt like watching this thing that, the worst part about this was I don't think Jordan Love or the quarterback matchup was kind of the big, storyline going into this game. But really, to me, it wasn't about the quarterback matchup that really determined this outcome of this game. It really felt like the Bears got outclassed from a coaching standpoint in this game. The game plan from Luke Getsy, what Alan Williams was doing on defense, against this Packers defense, it seemed like in the second half, LaFleur had answers for everything that the Bears were doing on that side of the ball. Was that kind of the vibe that you were getting from this one, or am I kind of alone on that?
That's certainly the vibe that I got in terms of you look at coaching. You're talking about a head coach who, again, has had some turnover on the offensive and defensive staff. But if we're going to be fully honest, I mean, big credit to Joe Barry and his defensive staff for really making the adjustments compared to last year. I think here's what happened is most fans, and people aren't going to want to hear this, but sometimes I just love to be provocative regarding this league as well as this team. But most fans, I think, spent all offseason convincing themselves that the Packers were absolutely putrid because Aaron Rodgers was finally gone, because the Bears had a quarterback who, again, showed potential throughout last year, and the arrival of DJ Moore and Darnell Wright and Nate Davis and Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards. And again, those are all valid concerns. But a lot of people thought that the Packers would just be this organization that was going to limp their way into having to forego Jordan Love as a starting quarterback, when really, I mean, the coaching staff made all the big difference in the world. And this just goes to show that it wasn't just the last few years in Green Bay. Did one guy get all the attention? Yes. But if we're going to be fully honest, I mean, the Packers came out and they played like a well-oiled machine, whereas the Bears absolutely did not. And again, you can sit here and play devil's advocate and kind of say, well, the Bears have like 10 to 11 new starters on both sides of the football between the offense and defense. These are guys that really haven't played together in regular season games. It's not all on the quarterback. It's byproduct of the talent around the quarterback that just did not perform well enough. Like, that's fine. You can make those statements. But also at the end of the day, like, you had one coaching staff that went into this thing with a game plan that they stuck to, and they made the adjustments, and they were fully prepared, compared to another coaching staff that didn't necessarily make the adjustments. It became very clear and apparent that they got too cute, which I just think we need to stop using the term too cute and just have to start saying that sometimes coaching staffs at this level just continue to force things instead of being adaptive and innovative. I mean, there was a point where during the game, I was thinking to myself that, guess what? This is a team where if you want to know what this offense can be and what you have to do to get this offense going, go back and watch that Week 7 Monday night game against the New England Patriots from last season to get an idea of what this offense needs to be. Now, I will also say this, final point being devil's advocate, is if this was any other team, right, on the schedule, whether it was Detroit, whether it was Minnesota, whether it was Tampa Bay or the Broncos, whoever else the Bears play this year, and the Bears end up losing, we're sitting here, people are on social media, people are going to talk about how it's just one game, it's a long season, there were good things, there were bad things. But the reason that this loss is as bad as it is, and the reason it gets so overblown, is simply because you did lose to the Green Bay Packers, who you have not beaten since 2018, who effectively come into your house year after year after year and beat you on the national stage, whether it's Sunday night or Fox Sports, whatever it is. And then what happens is, it's back to the drawing board, and everyone just wants to say, well, the Packers this, the Packers that, where in reality, it's just like, what? Look at your own organization, how they've failed consistently year after year after year to build a team that is going to be able to beat the Green Bay Packers. And the reality is very simple. It's like my brother, I was texting with him back and forth today, and he made a really good point that I agreed with. He's just like, look, it's so sad how a lot of people got overly hyped the Bears could finally beat the Packers when Aaron Rodgers was out of the division. And again, my brother's not wrong at all, because this was a showing that you look at and you absolutely say, you know what, it's going to sting for a long time. And regardless of how this season plays out, the Bears could end up winning the Super Bowl. And that is the only reason that people would even remotely forget about this loss. But if they win, 10, 11 games, make the playoffs, exit in the divisional round, this loss is still going to be one that everyone looks at and says things could have been so much more different, because it was a momentum builder at the end of the day, and the Bears didn't get it done.
Yeah, you make a great point. I think this loss does hurt a lot because of the fact that it is Green Bay, and you have all that hype going into this thing, where both fan bases on Twitter are going back and forth. We know how, these fan bases can get after each other with the trash talking, even though, like, for 3 decades, the Packers have had, the I don't know what you want to call it. They've had bragging rights for this rivalry for such a long time that I don't know why Bears fans are talking trash at this point. We have nothing. There's nothing that Bears fans, can say at this point that can put them give them any advantage here, because the Packers consistently have proven that they're the better organization. Top down, they have the better talent. They put together better teams. They're better coached, and that all showed in this game. Let's just get into, like you mentioned, the organizational failures. Let's talk about those, because I think a lot of, and again, it's week 1. You don't want to overreact, and I think a lot of the reason why we're putting this team on blast today is because of the fact that it is Packers, like you said. But let's just look at things right here with what we saw. Like, from a coaching standpoint, I thought Luke Getsy's game plan was a hapless mess. How many times did they run the ball on early downs instead of trying to find ways to, get themselves in passing situations to where they could air it out a little bit and utilize DJ Moore in the passing game and utilize Darnell Mooney in the passing game? 2 guys that are very good in the deep to intermediate part of the field, and you're just not using that aspect of what they can do, right? Instead, you're running the ball, even though clearly your offensive line is getting outplayed up front by the Packers' defensive line. And then all the screens they had in this game, I couldn't tell you how many screen passes they had that just didn't work in this game. And what made it worse after a while was that you could tell that the Green Bay defense knew when these plays were coming, and they were all over them, right at the outset. Right. So it clearly shows to me that Getsy is not doing a great job of disguising his play calls in a way, or sequencing his play calls so that they're unexpected. Right. It's very predictable. You can tell when he's going to call a run play. You can tell when he's going to call a screen play. When he's going to call a drop back passing play. And the Packers were just all over that. I think some of that is probably because Getsy had all that time working under the Packers, so they know his tendencies very well from his time coaching there. But at some point, you got to adapt. Like where were the quarterback runs that we saw last year for Justin Fields, where they would do creative things to kind of get him out in space and get him big plays, explosive plays in the running game? Where was that stuff in this game? They really didn't mix that in, right? It felt like they tried to scale things back on that end to not make it as gimmicky. And in the process, they ended up limiting themselves because they took away probably the best asset that Justin Fields has right now, the 2 best assets he has right now, which is his mobility, his rushing ability, and his deep passing ability. And both of those things they did not utilize today. They tried to make this a short passing game, get the ball out quick, run the ball type of game plan, and it just wasn't going to work. And I get it, like the offensive line, they clearly weren't ready to take on this defensive line that the Packers had, this pass rush that really started to get after Justin Fields when they did have to pass the ball a little bit more. But at the same time, man, like at some point you can't coach scared in this league. You got to coach with some aggression here. You got to put everything on the table and say, look, we believe in our guys. We got to go out there and just make plays and execute. And they just did not do that today. They played scared from the outset, and that kind of reverberated throughout the entire game because the players, it felt like early on, they did not have a lot of energy. And that's the thing about this game is that, the second year of this regime here, right, Ryan Poles makes a lot of moves in the offseason. This is his team, right? Most of this team is built on his guys that he brought in either through the draft or free agency or trades or all that stuff. And this is supposed to be the game that set the tone for what this team, this franchise is going to look like going forward under Ryan Poles and his, management here. And man, it was just, it just wasn't it, man. From the way this roster is constructed right now, like the defensive line, I couldn't tell you how many times Jordan Love had a clean pocket and had like 5 seconds to throw with no pressure, right? It was just, they couldn't get after the quarterback whatsoever. They couldn't stop the run when they needed to. Like the Packers got multiple big gashes in the run game. And it felt like in that second half that once they started to go to the run a little bit more, that there's nothing the Bears could do to answer that. And that just made things, you just knew, like, once that started to happen, like, okay, this thing is getting out of hand right here, right? So, yeah, it's just a frustrating loss. You could just see that nothing was working on both sides of the ball. And that's really what makes it frustrating, is that, let's just shifting the conversation to the quarterbacks here. You know, again, like I said, a lot of the hype of this game was the matchup between Jordan Love and Justin Fields, but it really didn't feel like either quarterback played a big role in the outcome. It felt like even if Justin Fields had, and I don't think Justin Fields had a great game today, like especially in the second half when the Bears got down, he started to press a little bit and, made some really bad turnovers, really bad mistakes late in this game. But I thought Justin Fields had a solid first half, and the Bears weren't able to score because the rest of this offense just wasn't working. The game plan just wasn't it. Meanwhile, Jordan Love, I thought he was like average at best, and he goes out there and his stat line, it makes it look like he just had like a fantastic game. And really, I really wasn't impressed outside of one throw that Jordan Love made. So moving on to that quarterback discussion, like, what were your thoughts on Fields' performances, and what did you see out of Jordan Love today?
I mean, you look at the way that both of these quarterbacks played, and you're effectively talking about guys who, again, are not even top 15 quarterbacks by any stretch as of right now. Now, things can certainly change. It's like I mentioned before, it is an incredibly long season, but it's also just so important to be conscious of how many times the Green Bay defense set the Packers offense up for success, which, again, give credit to Jordan Love because he did take advantage of that. And then even Justin Fields, you could just tell that this was this incredibly structured game plan, which, if we're going to be honest, I mean, and I've said this multiple times over the last 3 years, right? Dating back to 2020 when you and I were on this podcast talking about how Justin Fields is the type of quarterback where structure is just not his thing at all, right? Like, there's a handful of quarterbacks around the league, like a Josh Allen, a Jalen Hurts, a Justin Fields. I would even tend to go ahead and throw in Patrick Mahomes to that conversation where, structuring things has never really been their thing, and that you kind of have to have this like semi-spontaneous game plan for them to be able to go out and execute. But you talk about being aggressive, and aggressive is Justin Fields' real sort of mentality, right? He wants to rip the ball every single time and have that, 40, 50, 60-yard gain. But the Bears were too realistic in this game. And when they did get aggressive, it just was not the right time to get aggressive. Take case in point, that first drive. You have a team that, again, marches down the field, and it's like 4th and 1, 4th and 2, direct snap to commit fails on 3rd and 1. And all of a sudden you're facing a 4th and 1. At that point, it's kind of just like, just punt the football away, simply because you effectively gave Green Bay an incredibly short field to work with, which, again, there's two things to look at with that. It's execution, but it's also just a bad decision by the coaching staff. And, really that first drive, you could tell that the quick game was working to get Justin into a rhythm. And I thought when the Bears were going kind of quick game, they really got the most out of Justin Fields. There was some growth as a passer from him today, but again, it wasn't necessarily the growth that anybody anticipated. And if we're going to be quite honest, I mean, it was always unrealistic to expect him to come out and to throw, I shouldn't even say 400 yards, but like 250 to 300 yards and have 4 to 5 passing touchdowns. I mean, those types of performances, some of the top quarterbacks in this league don't even do week in and week out. But I mean, you look at both of these guys, and it was very clear that you had two young raw starters on both sides of the football. Now, case in point with Jordan Love, you saw a lot of confidence, you saw a lot of poise, and you just saw a guy who, if I was to sum it up, was a point guard more than anything else that knew how to use the resources around him.
Yeah, I guess if there's anything I'll disagree with you there is that, like, in year 3 for Justin Fields, I think we should be expecting more in terms of, the gaudy passing numbers and him being able to go out there and put up those, high yardage games. Like even in this game, like, he wasn't even able to he barely got over 200 yards passing in this game, and a lot of that was in garbage time. Now, some of that is because Luke Getsy refused to throw the football for the first 3 quarters of this game, basically, which is just mind numbing considering they were down the entire time and the run game just wasn't working. The screen game wasn't working. So I don't know why you don't try to like air it out a little bit and see, actually utilize Justin Fields' strengths, which is his downfield passing ability. But yeah, I mean, I thought Fields, he looked solid in the first half for me. He was making good decisions. He was getting to his checkdowns. He was going through his progressions. He was getting the ball out, reasonably well on time. But it felt like in the second half when, things started to go haywire for the Bears, that he did start to press a little bit. He did start to force things. And that's what we saw at the fumble, like him just trying to make a play that wasn't there, trying to get out of the pocket and just being loose with ball security. And then the pick six is just, that's one of those mistakes where you can look at, especially out of context and say, like, in year 3, you cannot be making those mistakes, right? Because he was staring down a receiver the entire time. There were 2 Packers in the air, and he just threw it straight to Quay Walker. That's just something you can't do, right? But yeah, those were two egregious mistakes. But again, before that, I thought he was playing a solid game. And I thought he looked like the better quarterback of the two, but those are back-breaking mistakes you can't make. And it does stink that I felt like after a while that mentally he kind of just shut down. And, the pressure that the Packers were getting on him got to him. The pressure of having to keep up with the Packers offense got to him, and he started to press things. And that's where we started to see him start to fall into some of his bad habits. So will I say that this is a positive game for his development? I don't think so. I think we saw some good, some bad. Ultimately, we need more of a sample size on Justin Fields and whether, because this year really is about determining whether he's the guy moving forward. We're going to need to see more evidence moving forward. Now, for Love, he made like one really impressive throw in that touchdown. I think it was the jump ball touchdown. I forgot who he threw to. I think it was Dubs. I think he threw the touchdown to. But I don't know. All I'll say on Jordan Love, this is not a Packers podcast, but all I'll say on Jordan Love, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible here, is that I don't really fear his prospects of being the next, Aaron Rodgers or continuing that Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre legacy. I'll just say that. Like, I thought he made a couple of nice plays, but it's also like when you have the Bears pass rush that doesn't get any pressure on you, and you have numerous like mistakes in the back end where there's numerous coverage busts going on where guys are wide open. Like, I don't know. There's not a ton I can say for Jordan Love. There are a couple throws where I think, he wish he probably had back, a couple plays that, the Bears could have capitalized for turnovers out there. I don't know. I thought it was a pretty mid performance overall, but the Bears defense is so bad they still gave up 38 points on him, or 31 points on him technically, which is just really speaks to them. All right. Let's wrap things up here by getting to 3 players stock up and 3 players stock down. So Usayd, I'll start with you. Who are your 3 guys that you're going? Let's start positive here. Who are your 3 stock up players from this game?
Yeah, it's hard to sit here and say, hey, stock up, right? But number one, I think the anonymous choice for everybody at this point should be Roschon Johnson. You look at kind of what he did coming into the game in the second half, the one big hit he had on the Packers defender, I believe it was Rayshon Nixon, just absolutely trucking him over. I mean, that is the type of play that makes you go ahead and say, why the hell was Roschon Johnson not starting from the beginning, knowing that he is the best running back on this team? And if you follow along with the Bear Report live VIP game chats, which I highly recommend you do because it's a chance to talk to fans that have subscribed to the site, but also just, some of the publishers and writers in general, that is one thing that I put in that chat. So going into week 2, the expectation is that some of the changes that need to be cleaned up are that we see Roschon Johnson in the backfield, more of Roschon, less of Khalil Herbert. And then you look at, 2 other guys in terms of stock up. It's really difficult to sit here and say, right? Because it was something where everyone struggled to some extent, but I will say, Tyreek Stevenson, along with Tremaine Edmonds, played really solid games. I mean, Tyreek Stevenson, granted, he's a rookie. He was still flying around and trying to do everything that he could, including filling those run lanes. And then you look at Tremaine Edmonds as well, who his size really sticks out in that Bears defense, right? You saw why the Bears believe he's the perfect Mike in this Eberflus 4-3 cover 2 scheme. But ultimately, what it comes down to is Tremaine was flying around today, making as many plays as he could. And on a young team and a young roster, he is one of the more experienced guys that, quite frankly, after a loss like this, you need to look to in order to get things moving in the right direction.
Yeah, for me, Roshan was one of my stock up players as well. I thought he played a really solid game, and I think he needs more carries, more targets moving forward. Like, he only had 5 carries for 20 yards and a touchdown. He also had 6 receptions for 35 yards. One of them could have been a touchdown, but it got called back. Well, it wasn't called back, I should say, but he did just barely stop out of bounds before getting it. It was a great effort by him. I thought the rookie looked pretty impressive. I thought he had a pretty solid outing overall. My other stock up player is Darnell Mooney. Didn't have a ton of an impact on this game. But he led the team in receiving, 4 receptions for 53 yards. He had the 1 touchdown. Him and Fields still have that connection still. And it was nice to see that because, he was injured going into this training camp, kind of got off to a slow start in training camp from the days that I was there. This is a big year for him going to a contract year. And he looked like, quintessential Darnell Mooney, right? Like, he looked pretty solid there. So it was nice to see him kind of show up and play. In terms of my other stock up, I guess, Yannick Ngakoue got a sack and made a nice tackle for loss in the backfield. I mean, there's really not much to say because the rest of this team is just absolute doo-doo. So I guess let's get to the negatives now, because now this is, I guess, the fun stuff to get to. So who are your 3 stock down players, coaches, whatever you want to talk about? The floor is yours, you said.
I mean, yeah, stock down's going to go to Luke Getsy for, again, just continuing to force things and not necessarily letting his quarterback or his wide receivers, mainly DJ Moore and Darnell Mooney, again, both guys who you just do not really have to structure things for, just kind of keeping them handcuffed along with the quarterback and Fields. So that's number 1 stock down. The number 2 and number 3 stock down is Eddie Jackson, hands down. I understand he had a quote right after the game, which was, yeah, well, on the first touchdown, I need to go ahead and keep leverage inside. And it's just like, look, dude, you've been in the league for 7-8 years now. That's a play that you've seen a million freaking times. So there's absolutely zero reason for you to go to the outside hip of the receiver. You should have always been inside hip, because inside hip essentially is inside leverage a lot of times. And then the last guy for stock down for me, I mean, at this point, it's like a gimme, right? But it's Khalil Herbert, okay? You're talking about a guy who, again, is going into year 3, doesn't necessarily have the home run hitting ability nor the pass catching skills to be an effective every down back. He's just better off being a guy who you put in a rotation. And he is certainly not the type of player that you can run north-south between the tackles, because he's just not the bruiser that Roshan Johnson or Deontay Foreman are. So for Herbert at this point, the script's already written for this year as well as next year. He's not going to go ahead and not going to get a second contract in Chicago. And it's just because you're seeing the limited skill set. Again, the same stuff that was an issue coming out of Virginia Tech play into year 3 for him.
Yeah, for me, I mean, you talk about Luke Getsy being stock down for you. I'm just going to say the entire coaching staff. And I talk about Luke Getsy, I'll just get my short thoughts out here because I talked about him enough. But the game plan was bad. He didn't adjust. He didn't take advantage of any of his players' abilities. Didn't get DJ Moore involved in the game plan whatsoever. Didn't even try to scheme him up a lot of targets either. Just a very bland game plan. And it's just the usual what we've seen from Getsy, right? Too reliant on the run game to get offense going. Too many screen calls that don't work, and just a lot of predictable stuff that the opposing defense is able to key on. And overall, just not a fan there. But also, I mean, you have to shout out the defensive coaching as well, because again, Jordan Love didn't really have to do anything in this game. He had all day to throw. The Bears coaching staff, whether it's Matt Eberflus in charge of the defensive game planning or Alan Williams, whoever it is that's in charge of the, I get that Alan Williams is the defensive coordinator. He's calling the shots here in game, but this is Matt Eberflus's defense. He's a defensive-minded head coach, right? You would think that out of all these units, that the defense by now in his second year is starting to be turning the corner. They've added talent. They got the linebackers that apparently Matt Eberflus crave so much. They've spent all these resources in the secondary to make this a better unit, right? They added a whole new defensive line this year. Why aren't we seeing any results from this defense? And the defense looked just as bad as it was last year. They couldn't get after the quarterback. I don't know how many four-man rushes we saw that did absolutely nothing in this game on third down, where Jordan Love, again, like I said, had all day to throw, had no pressure facing him all day. And on the few times that Jordan Love did face pressure or there was a blitz call, he wilted. He came up short. So, why weren't you calling more of that stuff? And it's not like you can say that you're afraid of the Packers receivers because Christian Watson wasn't playing. Jaden Reed went down with an injury later on in the game in this one. And there's really, again, it's a lot of young guys in this Packers receiving core. Why not try to test those guys a bit? You spent all these resources in the secondary. Get a little bit aggressive. Get in their face a little bit. Do some man-on-man defense. Don't be afraid, to be uncomfortable. I know that Eberflus's scheme is, built on the Tampa 2 and, zone principles and all that stuff and the hits principles. But at some point, man, you got to actually go out there and play some real defense and get in their face a little bit and make things uncomfortable for the opposing offense. And it just felt like, they did nothing to really alter the Packers game plan. It felt like Matt LaFleur, was just had his hands all over this game in the second half, especially. He just knew every call to make to kind of expose this defense, and it worked out that way. My second stock down, Chase Claypool. I'm so tired of talking about this guy. All the hype from training camp, and he goes out there and he does what Chase Claypool does, which is not make much of an impact. And I tried not to be too negative on Claypool going into the year because I was not a fan of the trade when they made it at the time. He definitely proved me right last year during his limited time, but I was willing to give him a chance going into this year. He had a strong start to training camp, and these are the type of performances that just don't get me excited about Claypool, right? He had a couple drops in this game, 0 catches, 0 yards receiving. He, had a couple bad blocks on a couple screen passes that blew up plays that didn't work. There were a couple instances where I noticed him just whining on the field for not getting the ball or not getting a target going his way. This is the Chase Claypool experience. The idea, and this is the meme that's been going on Twitter right now, which I think is pretty accurate, but the idea of Chase Claypool is a lot more significant or better than what you actually get from Chase Claypool. And this game was another example of it. I'm tired of Bears fans talking this guy up. This is who he is. He has a ton of talent, but at the end of the day, there's just something there that doesn't click with this guy. And I think at this point, I don't want to overreact too much, but again, I said at the time, but I just felt like this was a bad trade by Poles. It was a bad move to make. And so far, Chase Claypool has done nothing in games that actually matter to prove me wrong on this. So until we see improvement there, I don't know, Chase Claypool just wasn't it for me today. And then, the last stock down for me, I could say both sides of the trenches, but my stock for the defensive line was so low that I can't really say it's a stock down there. They played about as bad as I thought they would, but stock down the offensive line. And I thought it was hilarious when Jeff at the Bears blog tweeted this out there earlier in the week where he said that apparently the Bears internally feel really good about their offensive line, but had some concerns about their D-line. Well, if they were right about the defensive line, they definitely weren't right about the offensive line. And clearly going up against this porous defensive line every day in practice has his coaching staff thinking they're a lot better than they are on this offensive unit because they couldn't pass protect in true passing sets situations. They couldn't run the ball in this game. The Packers just absolutely dominated them up front from start to finish. Darnell Wright, he took some lumps as a rookie, which we knew it was going to happen. It's what that happens with a lot of these rookie offensive tackles. Braxton Jones had a pretty rough game, in my opinion, just on first viewing. And then this interior group, it's gone through a lot of injuries and turnover right now, but did not play a strong game either. So that's my stock up, stock down. And I guess before we get out of here, Usayd we're going on 30 minutes now. I think it's time to wrap it up here. Any final thoughts before we close things out?
Yeah, I mean, last thing I'll say is this, and I'm going to say this throughout the week leading up to the Tampa game, is that it is a long season, so just stick with the generic saying of it's not about how you start, but how you finish. And this is a team, again, they will continue to make strides, but it is an incredibly critical week coming up for the Bears, especially because if they can kind of figure things out and turn things around, I mean, it's going to be a season where you don't have to make the playoffs or win the damn Super Bowl, but what you can do is just be competitive enough to the point where next year, going into next year, you are talking about taking that legitimate step forward towards becoming one of the best teams in the league. This year is just kind of a hey, continue to build out your identity because the GM has made it clear that he wants a long-term winner here in Chicago.
Yeah, at the end of the day, again, it's week one. I don't want to overreact too much, but it is tough when you're losing and getting boat raced by the Packers like year after year. It's just frustrating. But yeah, I think this is a game that I think all of us were looking forward to or dreading, depending on your perspective. And it just didn't work out for the Bears today. You know, obviously, I'm heated. I'm not really happy about the way this team performed. I don't think none of us are happy about the way this team performed today. But like you said, it's a long season. You know, they have 16 games left, and ultimately, like, they're going to have to turn this thing around. Otherwise, there are going to be some serious questions about, you know, what not only the players in this roster, but what this organization is going to do under this regime, from a GM to coaching staff and all the way on down. But I don't want to get into that conversation right now. I think it's time to just do a send off here, and I'll just say, like, for all of our listeners out there, make sure to like, rate, subscribe to us at the Bear Report Podcast, also at the Picks for Polls as well, for our podcast over there. Usayd, where can our listeners find you on social media and you find your work?
Yeah, you can follow me on social media at Usayd Koshul. Check out my work on the Bear Report website.
All right. As for me, you can follow me on Twitter at AJFreeman25. You can find my work on the Bear Report as well. Make sure to keep an eye out for my Tracking the Trenches. Going to be having my first one coming out later on this week. Should be a lot of fun. Well, I don't know if fun's the right word, but it should be interesting to get into the film here and getting a second look at these guys. But until next time, Bears fan, I guess time to regroup and look forward to greener pastures next week, hopefully. But until next time, have yourself a good rest of your Sunday, and bear down, Bears fans.